Imagine this, it's 1963 and Britain is desperate to join the European Economic Community, the early version of the EU. The UK submits its application, confident it will be welcomed with open arms. But then, in a shocking move, French President Charles de Gaulle steps up to the microphone and says non. He vetoes Britain's entry, claiming the country lacks the European spirit and is too tied to the United States. It was a brutal rejection, one that Britain wouldn't recover from until a decade later. It wasn't until 1973, after de Gaulle had left office, that the UK finally joined the EEC, marking a historic shift in its relationship with Europe. Fast forward to today, and the irony couldn't be greater. After fighting so hard to get in, Britain chose to leave in 2016. But now, as Brexit's consequences pile up, a growing number of Britons want to go back. The question is, can they? Despite finally securing its place in the European community, Britain's relationship with the EU was always complicated. The UK held a referendum in 1975, just 2 years after joining, with 67% of voters choosing to stay. However, skepticism toward European integration never faded, especially with growing concerns over sovereignty, immigration, and financial contributions to the EU. These tensions exploded in 2016 when then Prime Minister David Cameron called for another referendum, believing that a vote to remain would silence Eurosceptics for good. But the result shocked everyone. 51.9% of Britons voted to leave. The problem was that Brexit supporters had no clear plan for what would come next. The campaign had been driven by promises of national control and economic freedom, but no one had mapped out how the UK would function outside the EU. As a result, after years of political chaos and negotiation struggles, the UK formally left the EU on January 31st, 2020, stepping into the unknown. As the UK woke up to its post-Brexit reality in 2020, it was immediately hit by an unexpected crisis. The pandemic disrupted global supply chains, crippled businesses, and forced governments into massive spending to keep economies afloat. For Britain, this was a brutal test of its newfound independence. Without the EU's coordinated response mechanisms, the UK struggled with medical supply shortages, trade disruptions, and economic downturns. Just as the country was trying to recover, another global crisis struck: the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The war sent energy prices soaring, triggering inflation and a cost of living crisis. EU member states responded collectively, imposing sanctions and negotiating energy deals. But the UK was left to navigate these challenges alone. Many Britons began to realize that Brexit had left the country more vulnerable than they had expected. With businesses suffering, trade barriers increasing, and public services strained, discussions about rejoining the EU, once unthinkable, have started gaining traction. Free movement also played a crucial role. British citizens could live, work, and study anywhere in the EU, while businesses had access to a large pool of skilled European workers. Additionally, EU funding supported infrastructure projects, scientific research, and regional development, strengthening the UK's economy. Politically, being part of the EU amplified Britain's voice on the world stage, giving it greater leverage in trade negotiations and global policymaking. These benefits, once taken for granted, became painfully clear only after Brexit, as businesses faced new trade barriers, labour shortages intensified, and the UK's economic influence declined. Since the UK had all these advantages, why did its citizens vote to leave? The answer lies in a mix of political frustration, national identity, and economic concerns. Many Britons felt that the EU had too much control over their laws and regulations, undermining the UK's sovereignty. A major rallying cry for Brexit was the desire to take back control of borders, particularly regarding immigration. The free movement of people within the EU led to increased migration, which some voters blamed for job competition and pressure on public services. Additionally, there was widespread resentment over the UK's financial contributions to the EU, with the belief that the country was paying more than it was getting back, despite economic data suggesting otherwise. Eurosceptic politicians and tabloids fueled these concerns, portraying the EU as a bureaucratic machine imposing unnecessary rules on Britain. Over time, these frustrations built up, leading to the shock decision in 2016, as millions of voters chose to break away from what they saw as an overreaching European system. However, in the years following Brexit, many Britons who once supported leaving the EU have started to reconsider their decision. As the realities of Brexit set in, rising trade barriers, labor shortages, and economic instability, public opinion began to shift. Businesses that relied on EU markets struggled with increased bureaucracy, and sectors like healthcare and agriculture faced staffing crises due to the loss of European workers. The cost of living crisis, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, further highlighted the economic disadvantages of being outside the EU. Polls now show that a growing number of people, including some former Brexit supporters, believe leaving was a mistake, and that the UK should seek closer ties with Europe, or even rejoin entirely. We cannot say that the economy is the only reason why Britons are reconsidering their decision to leave the EU. Demographic changes have also played a crucial role in shifting public opinion. One of the most striking patterns in the Brexit vote was the generational divide. While over 60% of people aged 65 and older supported leaving, the vast majority of young people voted to remain. The problem is that many of today's young pro-EU citizens were too young to vote in 2016. Over the past 7 years, millions of new voters have entered the electorate, and they overwhelmingly support closer ties with Europe. Meanwhile, the older, Brexit-supporting generation is gradually declining in numbers. This natural demographic shift means that if another referendum were held in the future, the outcome could be very different. The generational gap also highlights a deeper issue. Many young people feel that their future was decided for them by an older generation that won't have to live with the long-term consequences of Brexit in the same way they will. As time passes, this shift in voter demographics could make the prospect of rejoining the EU more politically viable. While public sentiment toward the EU is shifting, rejoining would be far from simple. One of the biggest obstacles is political will. Despite growing support for EU membership among voters, no major UK political party has a concrete plan to reverse Brexit. The ruling Conservative Party remains committed to staying out, while the Labour Party, despite favouring closer ties with the EU, has ruled out rejoining in the near future. Even if a government were to pursue re-entry, it wouldn't be as easy as simply undoing Brexit. The UK would need to reapply as a new member, and the EU is unlikely to grant the same special privileges it once had. One of the most significant was the rebate on its financial contributions, negotiated by Margaret Thatcher in 1984, which reduced the amount the UK had to pay into the EU budget. The UK also opted out of the euro, keeping the British pound instead of adopting the common currency, allowing it to maintain independent monetary policies. Additionally, Britain did not join the Schengen area, meaning it retained full control over its borders while still benefiting from the EU's single market. These exceptions allowed the UK to enjoy the economic advantages of EU membership while avoiding some of its deeper political and financial commitments, privileges that would likely not be offered again if Britain were to reapply for membership. Beyond politics, there's also the issue of trust. Many EU leaders feel that Britain made its choice and would not want to go through another cycle of uncertainty. Some might demand strict conditions, such as adopting the euro or fully integrating into EU policies, which could be politically unpopular in the UK. Additionally, businesses and institutions have already adapted to life outside the EU, and some industries may resist the disruption that rejoining could bring. Finally, Brexit has left deep divisions within British society, and reopening the debate could trigger another period of political turmoil. For now, while the conversation about rejoining is growing, the path back to EU membership remains complex and uncertain. As Britain navigates its post-Brexit reality, the question of rejoining the EU is no longer a fringe debate. It's a growing discussion fueled by economic struggles, shifting demographics, and political uncertainty. But even if public opinion continues to turn in favor of re-entry, the road back is anything but straightforward. The UK would not return as the privileged member it once was. It would likely face stricter conditions, a loss of its former exemptions, and a long, complex negotiation process. The real question is not just whether Britain wants to rejoin, but whether it is ready to accept the compromises that come with being part of the EU again. For now, the UK remains caught between two worlds, too disconnected from Europe to enjoy the benefits it once had, yet too interlinked to function entirely on its own. Whether it moves forward or turns back is a decision that will shape its future for generations to come. Do you think the UK should rejoin the EU, or is it better off staying independent? And if another referendum were held today, how do you think people would vote? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video.